to another Apollo Papyrus episode. I am Aaron Apollo Camp. For this episode, my guest is a panentheist, has lived in places as varied as the United States, Pakistan, and Guyana, is the host of the Byte Sized Blessings podcast, and is the author of 3 illustrated books, A Tale of Two Rabbits, The Nuts Guts, and Boom Chicka Meow Meow. Her name is Kirsten Rudberg, and here's my interview with Kirsten. Kirsten Rudberg, welcome to Apollo Papyrus.
So excited to be here. Thanks for having me.
You are, to my knowledge, the first guest on this podcast who identifies as a panentheist. Tell us more about panentheism.
Okay, yeah, absolutely. And it's so interesting. I was just thinking about this the other day. I've obviously talked to a lot of people in all the gigs that I have, and every once in a while they'll ask me this question and I'll explain what it is. And invariably a few days later, they'll message me and say, oh my gosh, I think I'm that. I went to seminary and didn't have a religion. And so in my cohort, there were 2 or 3 people that were panentheists. And I asked them, I said, what is that? And basically it is the assumption or the feeling that spirit or creator or God or goddess or energy, whatever you want to call it, is in every single thing that we see or work with or encounter. And so that means, basically that the stones have spirits, that the trees have spirits, that the sidewalk has a spirit and an intention. And so it's interesting, actually, that so many people have come back to me and said, oh my gosh, I think I actually, instead of mainstream religion, I really believe that this world is infused, that everything's maybe conscious or co-creating with us or what have you. So, yeah.
Feel free to further introduce yourself to our listeners.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Well, I have a Master's of Divinity from Isla School of Theology. I don't have a religion, so everybody always thinks it's the weirdest thing that I went and got my Master's of Divinity, but I've loved folk tales and myths from all over the world my entire life. And so for me, going and studying that just was more of an in-depth journey into I took intro to Buddhism, intro to Islam. I checked everything out. I'm also a podcaster. I have a podcast called Byte Sized Blessings, where I ask people, everyone under the sun, atheists, Baha'i, religious people, a-religious people, if they've ever experienced something they thought was a miracle or magical in their lives, or just something that changed their lives in some seminal way. I'm an author. I'm rewriting the Tales of Peter Rabbit. Beatrix Potter already was kind of subversive, but my 3rd book is coming out at the end of April. I'm going to have a book launch at George R. R. Martin's bookstore in Santa Fe, Beasley Books. I'm making the series a little more overt and a little more aggressive. So the first book is a rewrite of Peter Rabbit, and on the front is a skinned rabbit in a pie. And so these books are kind of like for teen and adults, but they more actively engage with, environmental degradation, with sweatshops, with human trafficking, with so many things that are happening in our world right now they're kind of social justice problems. And it's going to be a 13-book series and kind of get a little sci-fi at the end because I'm into science fiction. But yeah, so I'm doing that. And then I'm a screenwriter. I have an animated series on YouTube called Murder of Two. It's about 2 crows who kind of sit on a line and they observe humanity and just look at how crazy we are. But yeah, I like to dabble in a lot of different creative forms. Makes my life more fun.
How did living outside the United States when you were younger in places like Guyana, which is in South America, and Pakistan, which is in southwestern Asia, change your life?
Oh my gosh. Well, when you're a kid and you grow up in those places, you don't know any better. And, when I was in Pakistan, I was a little bit older. And so I didn't know this was a different kind of childhood. And I was in school with kids from all over the world, from Vietnam, from Germany, from Canada, everywhere you can imagine. We were all together playing at recess, playing soccer, having fun, just having fun together. And the thing that I think changed me forever is, then when I was older and we left Pakistan, I moved back to the States. And middle America, middle of Illinois, which is white as white could be at the time. And I tell everybody it was astonishing because Jordache jeans were in, Velveeta cheese slices had just come on the market. Izod, it all of a sudden it mattered what you were wearing and how you showed up to school and all of and it was such a culture shock for me. And I've said it before that it broke my childish heart because no longer were kids just meeting each other and liking each other from the start. There was so much judgment. There was so much, like you're failing. There was a deep sense of shame because I didn't fit in with all the other kids. And, I said when I started seminary, that was when I realized that I needed therapy for moving back to the States because I'd gone from this really inclusive and fun and joy-filled kind of childhood to one where if you weren't wearing the right shoes or the right clothes, you were stigmatized and made fun of and bullied. And so I would have to say, that's how living overseas changed my life. Now I take that childhood and I've told people that I want to create the world's largest sandbox and just invite everybody to come in and play and have fun and be welcome and not judged and have conversation and get to know each other because, there's a lot happening in our world where that is not the case. And so really, the podcast is an outgrowth of me wanting to get people's voices out there who you might not hear them. You might not be able to meet them in your ordinary life, but hearing them on a podcast and getting to see that that person is just like you or just like me, it's a really good vehicle for really encouraging acceptance and tolerance.
You've written 3 books: A Tale of Two Rabbits, that tail spelled Tail, The Nuts Guts, and Boom Chicka Meow Meow. Without spoiling too much of each of those books, what are they about?
Yeah, so Tale of Two Rabbits is my rewrite of Peter Rabbit, and it basically details a little bit more in depth, what McGregor is doing to the woods that the rabbits live in. Also, just how Peter's trying to reconcile what happened to his father being baked into that pie. The Nuts Guts is a rewrite of Squirrel Nutkin. So it's a little, Nutkin has always been known as a little silly, a little flighty, a little ridiculous. So the book is a little more silly and flighty, and it more advances the story of what's going on in the world that these animals inhabit. Because I'm really just world building with these first 4 or 5 books, so the reader can get a sense of where the story's located. And then the third one is Boom Chicka Meow Meow, and it's a rewrite of The Tailor of Gloucester. And it's basically about a cat that runs a sweatshop where the mice are disposable and they work to create clothes and fashions for the humans in the town. And the tailor is human. He owns the entire business and he comes in and it's all about how humans basically are disposable. And as long as we feed that consumerist kind of need and that gluttonous kind of desire for more and more and more, then it doesn't matter how things are made. It doesn't matter what communities are affected, that it's okay to just consume. And so I'm kind of wrestling with that subject in that third book.
You used a different illustrator for each of your books. Who illustrated each book, and why did you use different illustrators for each one?
Okay, yeah, that's a great question. So the overarching theme of the entire series is going to be how humans make the same mistakes over and over and we don't learn. And so my illustrator for book 1 will illustrate book 4. Illustrator for book 2 will illustrate book 5. 3 will illustrate book 6. And so there'll be this circular kind of going back within the series to kind of get the momentum of a circle and to bring back my point that humans keep making the same mistakes and we never learn. So, all that being said, my 3 illustrators are just wonderful. When I was first doing, a call out, a very dear friend of mine said, "Oh my goodness, my niece Gabby Brandini, she's in college. She wants to be an illustrator. Talk to her. And Gabby was in college at the time. She said, yes, I would love to be a part of this series. So Gabby is illustrating book one, book four, and as the series progresses, more books. Kelly Fry lives in Portland, Oregon. She is a fabulous, fabulous illustrator. Um, really doing some cool, subversive, interesting stuff, some seriously feminist stuff. And it's just has this color palette that, I could die for. And I found her through my dear friend Joe Beal, who owns Microcosm Publishing in Portland. She's an illustrator for them. And then my last illustrator, believe it or not, I found her on Etsy. And so every once in a while, I like look through Etsy and I look at the illustrators. And Larissa owns Little Witch Factory and is just this astonishingly gorgeous illustrator. All of them are easy to work with. All of them are so kind and friendly, and they just have a different eye for what I'm looking for, and it's just been such a joy to work with all of them.
Your books were acquired by the legendary George R. R. Martin's library in, I believe it's Santa Fe, New Mexico.
Yes.
How were you able to convince George R. R. Martin's library to acquire your books?
Yeah, his bookstore, Beastly, which is just the coolest bookstore on the planet. So, I wasn't actually at the time. I was working in a job in Santa Fe, trying to get events together and showcase artists and authors and promote them and get musicians out into the limelight. And I wanted to do some partnership with different companies in Santa Fe. So I walked into Beastly Books one day, an hour late for my meeting because the day had started off terribly. It was last year on my birthday, and I got terrible news in the morning, which completely threw my entire day off. And the manager, Twig, was so nice and so kind and said, let's do this meeting another time. Don't even worry about it. It's okay. And I said, you know what? And then we started talking about Twig's writing. And Twig is really into squirrels and writing about squirrels. And I said, you know what? This is so crazy. My second book just came out. I'm going to go get my books out in the car. And since you've been so kind to me, I'm giving you my first and second book. So I went out, I signed them, I put the little stickers that go in them, and I gave them to Twig. And a few weeks later, Twig messaged me and said, "We want to carry this series. It's amazing." So it was very serendipitous and really kind of cool how it all happened.
Where do your ideas for books that you write come from?
Oh gosh, that's a great question. I had been thinking about Peter Rabbit and rewriting this series for like 10 or 15 years. And honestly, none of this came about quickly. It started as this kind of, I've described it as a monkey on my back. And I was working as a waitress in Portland. I lived there for 23 years, worked as a waitress. And, as you're doing the mundane stuff that waitresses have to do, filling salt and peppers and ketchups and all that stuff, my mind would just kind of float off into the ether and start thinking about interesting and different ways that I could, kind of have a more whimsical life or a more fun life, or how to rewrite and kind of do different things in this world. And Peter Rabbit came to me at one of those times. I have another project that I want to work on. It's called Dave, and it's basically about this everyman. Each comic is like 8 pages, 10 pages long. He dies at the end of every single one. And so these ideas just come to me while I'm kind of in this sort of liminal or fugue state, working and doing things that are, I've done 1,000 times. I don't have to concentrate, and they kind of just surface. And then, of course, with Peter Rabbit, it was once I thought of it, it was like, I couldn't let it go. And it was just on my back, nagging me for years. And then when I moved to Santa Fe during the pandemic, I had some time to kind of work on it more and get it out into the world, because it is terrifying to put your stuff out in the world. And certainly I've had some people say, wow, your books are so dark. But at the end of each one, there's a glimmer of hope, a reminder that the world is good and that we can make different choices. But the books are dark. And I think that if you look in the world today and you actually see deeply, you'll understand that what we're doing to the world or to other human beings or to our planet is kind of dark and demented. And so that's how Peter kind of came about. I'm going to use this old story, this older kind of world, and comment upon what's going on in this world now. So yeah, these things kind of, I would say they come up to me and they float to the surface while I'm doing mundane tasks. Yeah.
Are all your books self-published, traditionally published, or
Mm.
published via hybrid press, or did you use different publishing methods for your books?
Oh gosh, they're all self-published. So, and that's been a really interesting conversation. Because I know a lot of writers, especially in Santa Fe, and a lot of good art came out of the pandemic. People were creating things and writing things. And, my dear friend who has an incredible book, has reached out to people in the publishing world, and even they have said this platform publishing is changing and they're having problems trying to figure out how to pivot and make money. And so it's really hard for independent, creators to get their stuff out there. The first, I was not happy with the first company I used. Not happy at all. And I don't want to say a name, but the second one I found, Mixam, Mixam, I have been so happy and so pleased with. Their platform is super intuitive, easy to use. Very friendly when you want to change things, and the customer service is exceptional. So yeah, that's the one I use for books 2 and 3.
You booked the Camino in 2013. What is the Camino and what was the experience like?
Well, the Camino, I didn't know what it was even a year and a half before I knew what it was. And I actually had gone to a feast day in Portland at this gorgeous monastery outside of Portland. And the woman sitting next to me was the spitting image of a dear friend who had passed away. Someone that it devastated me. She basically got a rare form of Parkinson's and died within 5 years. So the loss of her friendship just about destroyed me. And a couple of years later, I was at this feast day, and the woman next to me looked exactly like her, down to the hair and the jewelry. Afterwards, we were talking, and she said, "Oh, I'm going to walk the Camino in the spring." And I thought, "What the heck is this?" And so my partner at the time gave me 3 or 4 books on the Camino, and I thought, "Oh my goodness, this is interesting. I would never do this. I'm not religious, but whatever. I guess this is interesting." And basically, they're ancient pathways. There are about 12 official pathways in Europe, from Switzerland, from Italy. I think there's 5 in Spain alone, where you can start from wherever and you basically walk towards Santiago, which is, your goal is to get to Santiago and the church there. It's basically the way of the pilgrim. And through a weird, really strange series of events that are kind of inexplicable, I was basically under the impression that I was supposed to walk the Camino that year. Every single thing I had to worry about to be able to do it just disappeared, and everything got facilitated. And I found myself walking the Camino, and I decided to take a more isolated and physically demanding route because I thought, if I'm going to do this, I don't want to go the party route. The party route is Le Puy, and it's like tens of thousands of people walk that, and you drink wine and coffee. But I thought, I'm going to do the one that's like, I know I'll be alone, and I'll do it with intention. And so I started from southern France, in Arles, where Van Gogh painted. And that year, Europe, Spain, France experienced the worst weather they'd had in 90 years. Everybody quit because it basically rained every day. I got hailed on and snowed on in May, but because I'd come so far, I thought, I'm not quitting. I'm not quitting. So I've never been covered in more mud in my life. And I mean, even though I had several people stop me, French people, and they said, I mean, you're walking alone, you're a woman, aren't you scared? And I said, no. I said, I'm supposed to do this. I feel so sure that this is part of my life path that I'm not scared. And I ended up having one of the most revelatory and astonishing and crazy Caminos that was just so full of so much love. I walked through all these really small villages where there was sometimes no one out in the village. But when I would encounter people, they just loved me up and cared for me and gave me free food. And I mean, it was just the craziest Camino experience ever. I've never felt more loved by complete strangers in my entire life. So yeah, it really was this moment in my life when I understood that sometimes jumping off the cliff and having the adventure is worth it.
I'm going to ask the final two questions I have written down as a single question. You host a podcast called Byte Sized Blessings and a YouTube and Vimeo channel called Murder 2. And you mentioned this a little bit earlier in the interview. What can listeners expect from a typical episode of Byte Sized Blessings? And what can viewers expect from a typical episode of Murder of 2?
Okay, yeah, great question. So, Bite Sized Blessings, I interview human beings. I have two versions of the podcast. You can either listen to the little bite-sized episode, and it's BYTE, by the way, little bite-sized episode, which includes just the nugget of the miracle or strange event that this person's had happen in their life that's inexplicable. Or you can listen to the longer form interview where you can get to know the person, get to know how their world is, their religion, or what have you, who they are as a human being. And so in Bite Sized Blessings, I've had everything from someone who died 3 times and talks about what he saw on the other side, to ghosts, to mothers that have been pivotal in someone's life, to groups of friendships, to people have had visions. I just interviewed a neurosurgeon, and his miracle was, when he came out to the waiting room and he talked to the families of people who had either passed away or had made it through trauma surgery, just that moment being with them, just how it changed his life. And then Murder of 2, it's a comedy. Every episode's about 2 minutes and 30 seconds long. They're really short form. And it's basically about the crows who are watching what's going on in the world, and they comment on different things that are happening. And so it can be everything from people walking around. There's a whole episode on a guy who's wearing a weird t-shirt in a park, and they comment on that t-shirt. Just the foibles of humanity and how strange we are, and how ridiculous we can be. And so it's a comedy shorts. Not, I mean, light, irreverent, fun, hopefully. And I have a great illustrator who lives in Czechoslovakia, and it's been wonderful working with him. I found him on Fiverr. All you creators out there, Fiverr is just an astonishing site for finding whatever you want out there to create with other people. So, yeah.
Kirsten, thank you for appearing on Apollo Papyrus. You were a wonderful guest.
Oh my gosh, Aaron, you're the best. I'm so grateful for this opportunity, and I loved meeting you. It's so fun.
Kirsten was a fascinating guest, and as is standard practice for this podcast, I will include relevant links in the text description of this episode. This is Aaron Apollo Camp reminding y'all to write and read your passion. Bye for now. Remember to subscribe to the Apollo Papyrus YouTube channel at www.youtube.com/@ApolloPapyrus and the Apollo Papyrus Substack newsletter at apollopapyrus.substack.com. Y'all can visit the Apollo Papyrus website at campaaronapollo.witsite.com/Apollo Papyrus and follow Apollo Papyrus on Threads, Instagram, Facebook, and Tumblr at Apollo Papyrus. Copyright 2024, Aaron Apollo Camp, all rights reserved. This podcast episode is intended for the private listening of our audience. Any reuse or retransmission of this episode without the express written consent of the podcast host is prohibited, except under fair use guidelines. Royalty-free music and sound effects obtained from https://www.zapsplat.com.